Hello, folks. Welcome. I am really delighted to be able to introduce to you Jeremy Perigo. Dr. Jeremy Perigo has his Doctor of Worship Studies from the Institute of Worship Studies in Florida. But before he did all that, he was a missionary in Turkey with his wife for 6 years. She was an MK who spent some of her growing up years there. And so the focus of his academic forum today at lunchtime will be, in fact, I can even probably give you the title of that. Nope, I guess I can't. Never mind. Yeah, that's not going to work. So anyway, it's not working very well right now, but you can talk about what you're going to talk about in your academic forum at lunch. And I will just say he's also currently the director of music and worship programs at the London School of Theology. He's also a professor there. He got his BS, Bachelor of Science, in management from Purdue and an MA in practical theology from Regent University here in the States. So I'm looking forward to having Jeremy around for a couple of days. I hope you will take the chance to get to know him, to listen to him. As a scholar, the focus of his research is on curriculum development, teaching, and worship and missiology. So he's lectured on theology, music, worship, and missiology in churches and mission bases and universities for about 10 years. As a cross-cultural minister, I wrote a few notes here. He says he was based with his family in Turkey for over 6 years, focusing on church planting and pioneering worship training among Turks and Kurds. Along with his wife, he launched the first national worship network. It has consistently gathered and partnered with indigenous ministry leaders, international church leaders, and leaders of mission agencies for over 11 years. So there are really good there's very, very good fruit that is still existent from his time in Turkey. So we're very much looking forward to hearing what you have for us today, and I hope that many of you can make it to the academic forum later on at lunch today.
Where is the building?
Oh, it's in the Siwa building, so sorry, at 12, come early, but 12:15, 12:20. All right? And you will get a chance to give input. There will be lots of time for question and answer because it's basically research that he's doing for a book, and he wants input from all of us. So very delighted to have you. Come forward and...
The title of that, I just looked it up, Contextualization Through Worship Studies, Discerning and Imagining Liturgical Arts in the Muslim Majority Context. So I need your help as practitioners and anthropologists, linguistics, translators, world arts. Hey, it's really cool to be here. Like, really. Before I share, I just want to say, you guys are my heroes. I mean that. I know a few of you and then know of a few of you by your research and work, but I love those who give their life to the kingdom. I could actually cry. I love that so much. You guys, the things that you sow into the world, into the nations, into the cultures, through translation, through working on the arts, in my view, that's the heart of God, the very message and life of Jesus and the mission he's called us to join him on. So it's a super huge honor to be sharing in front of some of my heroes, whether you're just starting out doing your master's or whether you've been on the field and coming back after decades and decades. Thank you for who you are and what you do. It's really powerful. Today I want to look at Exodus chapter 1 and 2, the whole thing. We won't read the whole thing. Sorry, we don't have time. I come from a Pentecostal background, but now that I live in London at London School of Theology and go to an Anglican church, I know that about a 20-minute talk is what most people really like, not the 1 to 2 hour sermons of my youth. You've read Exodus 1 and 2, right? You've probably, of certain generations, seen the Ten Commandments, right? That's most of the movie is kind of looking at Exodus 1 and 2 and then the next few chapters. Or if you're from a slightly different generation, the Prince of Egypt, right? Who's seen Ten Commandments? Who's seen Prince of Egypt? Who's seen both? We've covered most people. If not, I think some of them are available on Netflix. the first few chapters of Exodus, there's bits about the genealogies. If you want to look at that while we're talking, that's great. There's some powerful testimonies about the midwife standing against Pharaoh. There's some bits about Moses' mom and sister hiding him in the basket. You remember this, right? This is Sunday school flannel graph if you're from certain denominations. I can remember those pictures. But Pharaoh's daughter taking Moses into care, then Moses growing up, killing someone, running away. In the midst of this activity, the atmosphere around God's people, God's covenant people, is sorrow, slavery, genocide, and sadness. We don't often see that on the flannel graph stories. The Ten Commandments, the Prince of Egypt highlight that a little bit. But in these two chapters, even when you're watching these films or looking at these, where is God? Oh, you start to get beyond chapter 2. God is the primary character of the book of Exodus. His activity is what we see throughout the rest of this great book. He's speaking to Moses. He's sending plagues. He's hardening Pharaoh's heart. He's parting the Red Sea. He's speaking to Moses on Sinai. He shows his glory. He reveals his presence in the tabernacle. He guides Israel by a cloud by day and fire by night. But in these first 2 chapters, he's not the dominant character. Where is God? He seems absent. Joseph is gone. This first chapter starts out with that. Egyptians don't remember how Joseph saved Egypt and also the rest of the Middle East from famine. Joseph's death wish to be carried back. Do you remember this? Joseph's desire was to be carried back. Seems to be totally forgotten, this death wish of his to be taken back to his homeland. Israel is experiencing exponential growth. They're having lots of babies. But based on fear, the current Pharaoh is adopting a pretty extreme birth control strategy for this small migrant group. These policies sound like this Pharaoh is even more extreme than some of the policies in this country or Brexit where I'm at. Instead of a wall or visa regulations or preventing immigrants or raising the costs or leaving Europe, we have the death of innocent, helpless baby Hebrew boys. This could be possibly one of the darkest moments in Israel's history. Enslavement and genocide. Where is God? Why is this happening? There's no answers actually in this passage. There's no rationale to why Israel is experiencing an absence of God's presence. We see Ezekiel and Isaiah, good evidence for why God's absence was because of Israel's idolatry, their unbelief, they're moving away from the covenant. But in Exodus 1 and 2, we don't see that. We don't see disobedience or divine retribution or a lack of faith in Israel's part or that they need to pray more. Instead, it seems that they haven't abandoned God, but he has abandoned them. God's silent in the midst of a plan to kill babies and continual adjustment. Moses starts to come onto the scene. There's some glimmers of hope. He's even adopted into Pharaoh's family. Could this be the deliverer? But in chapters 1 and 2, has the champion arisen? No. He's a grandson of the Pharaoh, a powerful position. But Moses isn't the model of faith in these first 2 chapters. Instead, the midwives, Moses' mom, Moses' sister, Pharaoh's daughter, these are female models of faith in these first 2 chapters. They're, in a sense, the ones who believe in a covenant-making God and stand against Pharaoh's injustice. They all take a righteous stance. Pharaoh's daughter rejects her father's plan and adopts a male Hebrew boy. The midwives feared God and protected a generation of young men. God honors their faith and gives them families of their own. You'll see this if you read the passage. These women remind us to stand against injustice, even when it costs. God is seemingly absent, but we're still seeing some glimmers of his blessing. Israel continues to grow as a nation. In a sense, there's fruitfulness in the land of their affliction and oppression. Challenge is, this blessing brings more slaves for the Egyptians and more plans of the Pharaoh to kill more Hebrews. So much happening in these passages. I want us today to look at really 2-3 verses. Chapter 2, verse 23. The Israelites, this is verse 23, the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. Groans of loss, the pain of being forgotten, in desperate need of deliverance, a long period of unanswered prayer and forgotten covenant. My mom recently came to London to visit us to help babysit our kids while we were doing a conference, leading a conference. It's pretty rare for my mom to be able to visit, and it's pretty special. For nearly 30 years, she and my dad have been the primary caregivers for my younger handicapped brother. Severely handicapped from birth, congenital hydrocephalus, some of you may be aware of that. Spent most of the first 2 years of his life in and out of hospitals with surgeries and putting shunts in and trying to figure out what's going around. I can even remember doing homework in the hospital after school and things like that with my parents, helping me as they're also helping him. Before he was born, there was no warning. There was no preparation. There was no CAT scan that figured it out. Literally the first few hours of his life, he was in brain surgery. Interesting, during those first few hours, without really knowing the meaning of his name, my parents sensed God, gave them this name Josiah. Josiah, one of the meanings of that name in the Bible is he is healed by the Lord. As the second and third week of his life, they found out this meaning, and through years and years, they're part of an Assembly of God tradition who believes in healing and prays for healing and has even seen little glimmers of that, had words, prophetic words, things spoken over his life, but yet nearly 30 years later, he's still severely handicapped. Diapers. Needs someone to help him get in and out. Needs someone to feed him. We've seen God move in a few miraculous ways in his life. Some cysts have left him, but he still needs care. My mom's prayer, my dad's prayer, my prayers, the rest of our family, for his full healing, still remain unanswered. My mom, her faith reminds me of some of these women, the Pharaoh's daughter, these midwives, to continue to believe God and God's promises, even in areas where he seems absent, and even in present moments of suffering. This is an act of faith in the midst of unanswered prayers, daily following and trusting in God, even when he seems absent. This summary statement in verse 23 doesn't give us an explanation of why God's absent or why these prayers remain unanswered for such a long time. But we see groans and cries rising to God. Before we move on, there'll be maybe some glimmers of hope as we look at the last few verses of this chapter, but I'd love us to just take a few minutes together as a community and be honest before the Lord and authentic. Think about this in your own mind. Are there situations, circumstances where God seems absent? Unanswered prayers, places where you feel stretched. Are there friends or family like me that you've prayed for years to meet Jesus, to be healed? Maybe just difficulty in hearing the voice of God. Today, Robin and Brian are going to come and help sing a song where we can connect with God and allow our prayers and groans to rise. You may say, Jeremy, actually, things are really great right now. But flip on the news. Read some of the newsletters from your friends from across the globe. There are unanswered prayers all over the world. My daughter Zara is 5 years old. Zahra is 5 years old. And from most of her life that she can remember, the last year and a half, every night she's been praying for a friend of ours who's in prison in Turkey. She knows now what an unanswered prayer is. She says, "Daddy, when's he going to get out of prison?" Every time we pray. So maybe it's for the places in the media that you see, the Syrias, the Iraqs, the North Korea. Maybe it's places that you're well acquainted with, or where God has called you, where there are unanswered prayers, where in places where incense, where worship is not rising towards Jesus. And I want us just for a few moments as we sing this prayer from the Taizé community in France to allow our prayers, our authentic groans and cries. You don't have to speak that out. It can just be in your own heart, in your own mind. Bring those to the Lord.
Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me.
Can we sing that together?
Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Oh Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me.
God's silence dramatically breaks through in Exodus 2:24 and 25. It's not the way that we see it in Exodus 3, 4, 5, 33, and beyond. But verse 24 says, God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. God hears, he remembers, he sees, he takes notice of their condition. These two verses mark a transition in this book from outcry, pain, and human activity to a story led by God's divine activity. We see God responding. God hears, God sees, God knows. He experiences their suffering. He's aware of that suffering. Your unanswered prayers, they're not lost. They don't dissipate in the church or in your bedroom or as you drive in your car and pray those gut-wrenching prayers. God hears them, looks, and is concerned. He remembers. This book, Exodus 1, begins with that genealogy that's full of covenant identity. It's not just a promise on a piece of paper, but it's a relational covenant with people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And God in chapter 2 is ready to take action based on this covenant. Bookends to these two chapters, the genealogies and this idea of God hearing, seeing, and knowing reminds us that God's concern for his people, for his world, is ever present. Israel's not forsaken. You, me, heirs to the covenant, we're not forsaken. A lack of unanswered prayer, sensing that God's absent, doesn't mean always that you're forsaken. It doesn't always mean that you're in sin or walking in idolatry. We don't know why Israel went through this. Although today we can see the deliverance. And that's often the point of these great movies that we see. The Red Sea parting, coming into the promised land. But many of us often forget this place of suffering, although that's where some of us and many of our friends and many peoples on the earth currently live. Today, I just wanted to remind you that if you're in that place or you're interceding and praying for others in that place, not seeing the healing, not seeing the deliverance, not seeing a church planting movement come forth in a nation that has never seen that, God hears that prayer. He hears that groan. He sees that situation and takes notice of your condition. Let me just pray for you and for me. God, even though we don't see it, we know you are active. By your nature, that is who you are. Your creator, your deliverer, your redeemer. You're not some God on a distant couch or on a distant throne that we're begging to come and be active. You are our very present help in times of need. By your Spirit, we can know comfort. By your power, we can know and experience deliverance. By your Son, we see the salvation of us and peoples of the earth. I pray that we would be more sensitive to your activity. I pray too, God, that we would rise up with faith when we don't see that activity. Faith to believe you for the things that you have promised us. Faith like Pharaoh's daughter to stand against injustice. Faith like Moses' mom to send a baby on a basket down a wild river. Faith in you because of who you are and what you have done. Empower us by your Spirit and make Jesus present and known in our lives. In Jesus' name.